So we're going to start actually by going to our MTDES website before we actually get into the application. So if you have not been to our website yet, it's readyandsafe.mt.gov. When you get to the main page, you need to scroll down, click on Emergency Management, and I'll show you why we're doing this here in just a second. Go ahead and click on, you can either click on the Homeland Security Grant Program option right here, or you can go click on Grant Programs down here. You'll see that that pops open a new window. Then if you click on the Homeland Security Grant Program button here, you're going to see some attachments down here. So these two attachments are going to come up here in just a little bit. Do we want to show them right now, Burke, or just? Okay, we'll show them when we get into the guidance document. But the one we wanted to really hit is this guidance document here, and we strongly encourage everyone to read this guidance document before you actually begin your application. So we're going to click into it real quick. I'm not going to read through this word for word. It's 29 pages, but again, we want you to read through it before you do your application. This gives a lot of the kind of the overarching grant guidance that we want everybody to be familiar with. One couple things we are going to visit right here down towards the bottom here, so bear with me for a second. So we're going to talk about this real quick. So if you've done a Homeland Security application before, you probably know that up to 25% of the total funds can stay within the state of Montana for state projects. And so 20%. So the governor has actually determined where he wants the funding priorities to lie. So that's what you see right here. So the top one here is the State Management and Administration. This is the cut that we take here at Montana DES that just kind of funds our salary and our monitoring and our travel and things like that as we manage all the grants we're going to have. And then we don't have to read through these, but you can see just the dollar amounts that the governor has asked that go towards state agencies, and obviously that's contingent upon the total dollar amount we get, because we can't exceed 20% of the total funding. But this does come from the governor, so this is his decision. Scrolling down a little bit, we see something similar. Now this comes from the Senior Advisory Committee, and these are for projects of a regional basis. So these are projects that the Senior Advisory Committee have said that's important to the state. They want to make sure that these projects get funded each year, so they also attach the dollar amount. And again, these are contingent upon the total dollar funding of the grant itself, because we don't know how much that's going to be. So just glance through those when you download this document later. And then this attachment C here, again, if you've done a Homeland Security grant application before, you remember that we usually look at the top 5 gaps in core capabilities that's identified by the CIRA and the SPR. This year, we're actually doing 9 gaps instead of 5. So it doesn't mean if you have a project that's in a different core capability you can't apply, because you certainly can. It just means that projects that fit within these core capabilities are going to be evaluated a little higher when we get into our evaluation matrix, and we'll show that here in just a bit too. So there's also some definitions of the core capabilities. I really encourage people to read through these definitions. Some of them are a little vague, particularly operational coordination, operational communication. A lot of times those can be a little confusing just because of how vague they are. So read through the definition. If you have a question about whether your project fits that, by all means give us a call. You can call myself or Casey Fuller. You can also give Jay Lee a call. Jay Lee's kind of our core capability expert. So again, just the examples down there. And then we're going to show you where to attach this as we go on here, but this is one of those other attachments that I referenced on the previous page. So this is a letter of support from your LEPC, and we'll get into that here in a little bit, but just know that it's here on this guidance document. And then here's the evaluation matrix that we're going to use, and again, I'm not going to go through this line by line. You guys can look through this at your leisure, but these are the items that we're going to be evaluating your application on. And these are all items that were identified by the Senior Advisory Committee and the DES staff. And then here's some more core capability definitions down here. And then down here, here's a project priority list from your LEPC. And just briefly talk about this. The Senior Advisory Committee has determined that we're going to allow one application from each eligible entity. And an eligible entity is a unit of government. And so by that we mean that if you have a sheriff's office, they can submit an application. If you have a fire department, they can submit an application. It's not per county, it's per unit of government. But what we want here is if you are going to end up submitting more than one application in your county, so say your sheriff's office, your police department, your fire department, maybe public health, they're all submitting applications, we want that LEPC to actually tell us what the highest priority for the county is. And the reason for this is it is a very limited funding project. It does, or grant. It does tend to get pretty competitive. So we want to know what your top priority is if it comes down to the fact that we have to start looking at where to shift some limited money. So we'll get more into this here as we get into the application, and I'll show you where to actually attach it. So before we move into that application, are there any questions so far on this guidance document? And remember to press *6 to come off a mute. Okay, we'll jump into that application then here. So if you haven't already, the fundingmt.org is the page you'll need to go to. If you do not have a profile yet, you'll need to start right here by clicking register here. And actually, before I go any further, I'll just mention that we have produced a step-by-step guide on how to do this application. It will be posted on the website probably by the end of today. So that same place where we just went to look at that guidance document, you'll see that step-by-step guide. And it's literally a screenshot. It walks you through every single button you're going to need to press, every field you're going to need to enter data into. It's a 20-something page long guide, 31-page guide. So that'll be available on the website. So what we're doing here is we're kind of doing the same thing. We're walking you through step-by-step, but we're also going to talk a little bit about what we want in the application or what we need to see. So again, if you haven't created a profile, start by clicking register here. We'll just click into that real quick. It is a pretty basic form. I will tell you that once you create your profile, we actually have to approve it here at DES. So it's not something you can go in and create your profile and then immediately start an application. So that might take us a day or two, depending on what we got going on in the office. So I'd strongly encourage you to not create the profile the day before the application's due, which, by the way, is March 3rd. Create it now. That way, give us a couple days to approve it, and then you can start working on the app. So once you do have an approved profile, you'll log in right up here. You'll see a page that looks something like this. So what you'll want to do is click on Funding Opportunities, and then you'll see a whole bunch of different funding opportunities, because you'll notice that this page is used by a lot of different state agencies. It's not just DES. So what we're looking for is this one right here, the FFY 2017 State Homeland Security Program. So click into that. You'll notice just kind of a cover page right here. I encourage you to read through this cover page. I'm not going to read it word for word right now, but essentially what this is just saying is that we're using the SIRA and the SPR. That tells us where our high priority, low capacity core capabilities are. That's those 9 core capabilities we mentioned a minute ago. And then this just kind of talks about the purpose of the Homeland Security Grant Program. And then here's those attachments down here again, the ones that we saw on our webpage. We also put them here on the grant webpage. So if you haven't read through them yet, especially that guidance document, at this point we really want you to stop and read through that. A couple other website links down here. This is a website link that goes directly to our website, the one we just looked at. This is the authorized equipment list. I'm not going to click into this, but if you're buying any equipment, and we'll get into what's defined as equipment here in just a little bit, but if you're buying any equipment, or if you want to buy any equipment rather with this grant, it has to be something that's actually listed on here on this authorized equipment list. So once you've read through here, you'll want to go up here and click Start a New Application. You should see your name in this drop-down box here. Then you want to do a project title. And on the project title, we need this to be brief yet succinct, and we prefer that it start with the name of your jurisdiction. That just helps us when we're searching through all the applications. We may end up with 100 or more applications, and when we're looking through them, it just helps to search by the name of your jurisdiction. So just going to type in something here, because that's a required field. So start with the name of your jurisdiction, then just use a few words to describe the project title. Don't put any detailed information in here. There's going to be plenty of room for that yet. So what we talked about as we were discussing this is actually to come up with kind of a scenario to walk through. So we're going to say that this is going to be a shelter generator. So we're applying for a generator to use at a public shelter. I do know how to spell, trust me. Authorizing official, click the name down here. That in some cases can be your name. Would you want to throw anything else in there about that?
No. If you have your CEO, your chief elected official, or someone else that's in on Funding MT go ahead and use them there. Otherwise, you can use your name as the authorizing official, because we'll, on the next page, ask for the information for the chief elected official or primary person that can actually sign an agreement for acceptance of funds. So.
And that's another thing that can get kind of confusing, especially if you have like a fire chief or a sheriff writing a grant. Give us a call if you have questions about it. You can call either myself or Casey or Burke. Then down here, we're going to select our organization. We're going to hit save. So we don't necessarily have to read this, but this is the information we just entered. So it's under the general information form, which you'll see here in a second. We click that Go to Application Forms button, and you'll see right here, General Information. That's what we just entered. It's got a little check mark by it there. So all of these forms we're going to walk through here in the next 45 minutes or so, and by the time we're done, all of them are going to have a check mark by them. So we'll just go down the list one by one. We're going to hit FY17 Jurisdiction Information. So the entity name, notice that everything with the red star has to be in there. It is a required field. It won't let you save it. We'll just throw something in there just to get it to let us move through it. The DUNS number, if you're a government agency, you should have a DUNS number. If you're not familiar with what it is, you can talk to your treasurer or your finance person. I bet you $1 they know what it is. If for some reason you don't have a DUNS number, you can call this number here to get one. We cannot help you get a DUNS number. This is something you have to do on your own. It is a 9-digit number, so I'm just going to throw something in here just to get it to let me walk through it. We'll just, again, throw some info in here just to let the system let us progress. But this will be your authorizing official, and like Burke said, this is going to be the name of the person who is authorized to accept funds, enter into an agreement, sign an award document, etc. And again, if you're confused about who that could be, just give us a call. The program manager or applicant's agent, this is going to be the person who should be our primary point of contact here at Montana DES. So this is the person who's actually going to be working on getting the generator or getting the whatever your project is, but this is going to be our primary point of contact. So this isn't a required field, but I'm just going to throw some information in here just so we have it populated as we go along. And then your fiscal officer, if you have a treasurer or something like that, go ahead and throw their name in here. Every once in a while, we do need to get a hold of them. Sometimes if we have questions about a ledger or about a payment or something like that. So it's not a required field, but if you do have that person in your agency, please go ahead and throw them in. I'm going to go ahead and go up here and hit save. Wants me to do that in the right format.
Authorized official.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Hey, this is Keith with Rosebud County. On the very first page that where you have the attachments and the website links, that the FEMA authorized equipment list is a dead link.
Okay, we will take a look at that link and try to get it fixed. I thought we had a good link when we tested it, but we will definitely take a look at that. Burke's writing that down. So thank you for that feedback. And
concerning that link, since we're discussing it anyway, get over here. Concerning the AEL link, just kind of as an aside, if you actually download that link, upload it to your computer, it's got a search function which makes that page a whole lot easier to use, because then you can get in and actually look up whatever equipment it is that you're looking for, rather than spending loads and loads of time scrolling through the entire list. So just something to keep in mind.
But thank you, Keith. We'll definitely make sure we have that functional here as quick as we can. So once you've entered all your information, I don't know if you noticed, I had clicked save here a second ago, right when we started talking about that link here, but I had clicked save a second ago, and then it brings you to this page again, essentially where we just typed in everything. This is essentially to allow you to review what you just typed. So if you need to change anything at all, you go up here and click edit. Otherwise, if you're done, you hit mark as complete. And you'll notice we come back to this application forms page, and we have a little check mark here. That means everything's in there. So we're just going to keep on going down the page. We'll click on applicant assessment next. Now this is a page, if you're not a fiscal person, you might need to go grab your fiscal person, because it does ask some fiscal questions. And there isn't a star by here, but everything on this page we do need. It is required information. So this is just some questions that FEMA wants us to ask. It's essentially a way for us to determine the level of risk posed by awarding you a grant. So we're just going to throw some things in here. We don't have to go through these word by word just yet. But we'll just throw them in there just to get the form complete. But essentially it's just asking about your procurement policy, whether or not you've had any other grants, conflict of interest, that sort of thing. It's pretty self-explanatory if you're a fiscal person, but again, if you're not, you might need to go grab them. But they probably know all the answers to this. So any questions on that?
So the big part about this is, we talk about it as it's a level of risk, but what that really means to us is, if awarded this project, are there areas that we may need to help to make sure that we're all in compliance? It doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't hurt you in your application at all. However, it may say that we may need to sit down and make sure we're all on the same page going forward, especially with the 2 CFR, which a lot of different organizations are not familiar with. So just take that into account that it's not anything, if you answer no to this, it's not something that hurts you in your application.
Okay, so once you've entered everything on this form, go up here, click Save. Again, it takes you to where you can review it. So make sure everything's accurate. And again, if you need to edit anything, just go up here, click Edit. Otherwise, hit Mark as Complete. And there we go. We got the little check mark right there. So now we're going to get into project information, and this is where we kind of start getting into sort of the meat and potatoes of this project. So it does ask you for the title again, and we do need the same thing you entered in the title in that general information page. So we're just going to throw in the same thing we entered, County of Columbia Shelter Generator. And here's where you enter your core capabilities. Now you notice there's 2 drop-down lists. So if your project fits within one of the top 9 core capabilities that we're trying to target this year, go ahead and select it right here, and this one would. It would fall under mass care. If your project doesn't fit within that top 9, then you go down here, and here's all the remaining core capabilities. There's 32 of them total. So just select one out of one drop-down list. Here we're going to ask for a project narrative, and I think we did have a character limitation of how many characters, Burke?
10,000.
So yeah, we have a character limitation of 10,000, so it gives you a fair amount of room to go ahead and describe your project. Now what we're looking for here is we need a very objective detail about what your project is going to be, and we need to make sure that us here at DES in the Senior Advisory Committee, looking at it as an outsider's perspective, it's something we can understand. And what I mean by that is try to remember that we don't necessarily know your county or your city or your jurisdiction. We don't know how many fire trucks you have, how many shelters you have, whatever. So just think of it from our perspective that we don't know your jurisdiction, we don't know your challenges, so you need to tell us in a very objective manner. And try to keep a lot of the subjective emotion out of it. Sometimes we see projects that are written something like, well, if we don't get this widget, everyone's going to die. And I mean, we get it. Every project's important, but we do have limited funding, so we just need to make sure it's very objective but very detailed. Again, I'm just going to throw something in there just to let me bypass.
So when you're also writing this narrative, please keep in mind that you're also showing how this supports that core capability that was selected. So you want to make sure you tie it back to that core capability with giving us enough detail of understanding what this project is going to do.
And then kind of following right along with that, we do need the project outcome or the objective. So right here we need what do you want to get or what do you want to buy, and then down here we want to know what's the end result, what's the end game. So using our example of the public shelter generator, well right here is where you would describe the generator project, and then down here is where you describe the end game. So what's going to happen, what's going to be better in your jurisdiction if you get this generator project. Another thing to remember is that as we're presenting these applications to the Senior Advisory Committee, these boxes right here are really going to be the root of what they're going to look at. So consider that they may not have a chance to review your entire application page by page, line by line. So if you can somehow summarize what you need right in here, this is going to be the best place to go ahead and put that narrative. It's the only place to put that narrative. And again, I'm just going to throw something in there just to let me bypass. Is there any questions about that? I kind of consider this to be the most important part of the application, so if anyone wants to jump in and ask something, feel free. Okay, hearing none. We're going to go down here to the environmental and historic preservation. Now this is something that also can be a tad confusing, and a little bit of the background on this. This is related to the Environmental Historic Preservation Act, which is an act that federal agencies must follow. And if you're using federal funds, you have to follow the act too. So essentially, if you have any sort of construction at all, we need you to click yes on here. It'll require an EHP approval. And if we see a yes, if your grant is selected for funding, then either Casey or myself here at the grants section will follow up with you and walk you through this. But essentially what's going to happen here is if you did click yes, we're going to have you fill out a form. It's like a 9-page form, Casey? Yeah, it asks for, again, some more narrative. It does ask for some photos. So if you're going to be, well, let's keep our example of the shelter generator. If you're going to be pouring a concrete pad and planting a generator next to a building, it's going to ask for some pictures of where that's going to be. It'll ask for usually some maps so they know kind of where it is. Sometimes they want aerial photos, which a lot of people take off of Google Maps, which works fine. But basically what they're looking at is they want to make sure it's not going to disturb any historic artifacts. It's not going to impact a historic building. The most common thing we see is that if there is an impact that FEMA notices, they just come back and they say, well, you got to build a fence around it and paint the fence the same color as the building, and that way you don't have this ugly generator next to a historic building. That's pretty common. They can get a little more complicated sometimes if you're building like on a historical tribal land, things like that. But again, just for now, if you have any sort of construction, if you're mounting anything on a building, if you're disturbing dirt at all, just go ahead and click yes, and then we'll follow up with you and walk you through that as we go on. So scrolling down here, locally identified priorities. What we want to know here is your project that you're doing. Have you had any kind of training, exercise, real-world event, anything like that that actually tells you that this is a gap? And if you don't have anything, that doesn't mean your application can't be reviewed. I mean, it's still an eligible application, but this is part of our evaluation criteria. So let's say you've had a real-world event, and using our shelter generator example, let's say you had a power outage and you didn't have a place where you could send people that had backup power. Well, if you have an AAR, an after action review, that's where we want to know it. So you'd click yes. You just throw a little explanation here on there, and there'll be a place to upload the AAR later. But you just throw a little explanation, say, well, we had this real-world event in the winter of 2015, for instance. And you just throw a brief little explanation, and that upload will come here in a little bit. Then the maintenance, support, and sustainment plan. What we're looking for here is we want to know how your project is going to be maintained and sustained once the grant funding runs out. And we'll explain a couple things here. Keeping with our shelter generator example, a lot of times we see jurisdictions want to buy like a warranty or some kind of extended maintenance plan. And generally the Homeland Security grant guidance says that you can purchase the initial term of a warranty or an insurance plan, something like that, with the grant money. You can't purchase anything beyond that. So, for example, if you had the option of buying a 5-year warranty from the manufacturer, and maybe that came with a 1-year warranty, but you can tack on a 5-year warranty. You can do that with the grant guidance, but what we want to know is once the grant is ended, once that 5-year warranty is done, can you still sustain this thing? Do you have the funds? Do you have the personnel? Do you have the expertise to continue working on this generator or whatever your project is? So just throw in some narrative there so that we know you can sustain it. That's going to be part of our evaluation criteria there. Scrolling down here, that whole community level of support or letter of support, here's where you upload it. That's the one that we talked about on the previous page. So this works just like an email attachment. You just find some random document to throw in there. Thought we were going to create something on here. Okay, I'll just grab the PowerPoint. And then the LEPC project priority letter. You notice that is not a required letter because you may only have one project in your jurisdiction, so you may not need the priority letter. The whole community level letter of support is a required letter. We definitely want to make sure your LEPC or your TERC is on board with your project. So that is going to be required.
So one thing that I want to stress on this too is that the Senior Advisory Committee is asking for the priorities for the jurisdiction. It's not part of the evaluation matrix, but what they're really looking at is, are we off the mark with some of our, the way we're looking at this going forward? We really want to know what are the locals' priorities coming out of there. We still have to go through with the SPR and THIRA, but they want to know, are we on the mark with what we're doing? Is this something with our core capabilities, with everything else, and understanding what's important to the jurisdiction? So even though it's not being used as a part of that particular one is not being part of the evaluation criteria, it does help us improve this process and understand what the locals are looking for. The first one on there, the one with the LEPC or the TERC, that's to make sure that we have the whole community support, and that is part of the evaluation criteria, that you have your LEPCs review the projects.
Any questions so far?
This is Sherry. I do have a question on the priority letter, just to make sure I've got it right in my mind. If I have 3 different entities that want to put in for a grant, the LEPC ranks those 3 things and puts all 3 of them down, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And really, you know, I mean, and it's not part of the evaluation criteria, but it does help us understand, especially if you have 3 of them that are in the same category or something else, that we're making sure that we're helping, that they're looking at the jurisdiction's needs as well.
Okay, thank you.
And what their priorities are.
Okay, scrolling down on this form, the next item is the multi-jurisdictional project impact. So what we want to know here is your project something that can be shared with the neighboring city, a neighboring county, throughout the state, et cetera? And it doesn't have to be. I mean, if you're throwing in a generator at a shelter, it might not necessarily be something that can be shared. Well, continuing with that example, last year we had a couple of applications that were asking for mobile generators with the intention that they could be used for their shelters, but also that they could be shared with neighboring counties. So if that's the case, just throw something in here, explain to us what that capability is or what the ability for the project being shared is. Then the next box down, it tags right along with that. It's kind of a somewhat similar question, but we want to know a little bit more about how you've outlined sharing. I mean, do you have MOUs with the neighboring jurisdiction? Is the neighboring jurisdiction taking training on your piece of equipment? Burke's going to jump in.
Yeah, so this resource availability one is also, are these resources something that are available from a neighboring county that's already, you know, that you have MOUs or sharing? It's okay if they do. If you look at the evaluation matrix, you know, even if you just have to be able to explain why it's important to have it in your jurisdiction as well, even though it may be available somewhere else. We want to make sure that we're not doubling up on resources that are already available, that are out there with the limited funding. So take that into consideration. There are certain projects out there though that may duplicate, but are very important for your local jurisdiction to have their own capability there. And so that's what they're looking for at that point.
Okay, so this is the end of the project information form. Like I mentioned, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of this application, so we can pause real quick if there's any questions. Remember to press *6 to come off of mute. Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and go up here and save this form. So you scroll to the top, hit that save button. Again, it gives you a chance to review everything you put in here, so you can just scroll through it, take a look at it. If you need to edit anything, click Edit. Otherwise, go over here, click Mark as Complete. And now we have that little check mark again. So we'll go down to the next item, the
Hi,
local assessment.
excuse me, while you have that screen up,
Yeah.
what does the withdrawal mean?
Withdrawal, if you're done, if you don't want to submit your application, if you've maybe started something and decided it's not a project you want to apply for, you can hit withdrawal and that'll just delete it basically.
So,
Okay.
yeah, if you hit withdraw on there, it stops the process. We won't be able to move it forward in there for review.
Okay.
It won't be able to be submitted. It will still show up on there as being, but it'll be in the status of withdrawal, and there's nothing. We can't reopen that one, so you would have to start a brand new application for another one.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
You bet.
Can you hear me? This is Becky
Yes, I can.
McEwen from Park. I was wondering, if you have more than one project, do you, like for the city and then the county, do I need two entities? I mean, not entities, but application forms, like getting
Yes,
into?
you do. Yeah, you'll need two applications, and remember, like we said, that each entity can submit one. So if the city wants to submit one and the county wants to submit a different one, that's totally fine, but we don't want to see the county submitting two and the city submitting two.
Okay, gotcha. So I've got to go back into the funding and then do that application again.
Correct. And the way it would be is that it's the way that the senior advisory committee is looking at this is it's each entity needs to have their own application. Now, you as a coordinator or someone could be the project manager for both, but it would be the entities that are able to put in for one application. So if the city fire wants to put in for one, that needs to be a separate application than the city police. And they want to make sure we're not combining applications so that it is truly one specific project that they're evaluating on these applications.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, let me just back up a second just so everybody remembers where we're at. So now we're down to the local assessment documentation. So we'll click in here. And if you remember on that previous page, we mentioned if you have any after action reviews or anything like that that gives you a little bit of backup for your application, this is where you're going to want to go in and submit it. Now, the trick with this system is if you don't have anything you want to submit, you still need to go into this form, and then you'd hit Mark as complete. But if you do have something you need to attach, click into this form, go up here and click Add, and this works just like attaching a document to an email. So find your document, put in a real brief little description about what it is, and then you hit Save. And you can do this as many times as you need. You can keep hitting Add if you have more documents you need to upload. And once you've finished, and again, remember, if you don't have anything, that's fine, but just get in here and click Mark as complete. And there we go. We got that little check mark there again. So now we'll go into multi-jurisdictional impact letters of support. So this is where we talked about earlier. If you have a project that's, this is where we want the LEPC letter, right, Burke?
Additional LEPC's letter.
Additional LEPC's letter, yeah. If you have a project that's going to benefit the next county over, the next city over, something like that, we want the LEPC or an entity within that county, maybe the county fire department or something, to just draft you a letter just saying we support this project, it'll be of benefit to us, et cetera, et cetera. Again, if that doesn't apply to you, it's completely fine, but we still need you to get into this form, hit Mark as complete. If you are going to add something, just like on that previous form, you click Add, find your document, put in a brief little description, and hit Save. And also, just like that previous form, you can do this multiple times if you have multiple letters. Once you're done, hit Mark as complete. So now we got that check mark there. We're going to go down to Work Plan Milestones. So this is something we might take a few minutes longer to explain. This is something that gets, I guess, glossed over or missed a lot of times. So what we're looking for here is essentially a way that we can look at your project and see how the project's going to progress within the 1-year period of performance. And we do need a minimum of 2 milestones. We did give you 5. So what we want to see is just something that's going to show us, going through the bid procurement process, going through an installation process, going through a training process, going through a closeout process. Obviously, all that's going to change or depend on what your project is, but if we're keeping with our shelter generator example, you might see something, milestone 1 might be going through the EHP, the Environmental Historical Preservation. Then you might have a bid process, then you might have an installation, then you might have a training. You might need to train your maintenance personnel or something like that on how to work the system. So you can select the time frame that applies to your milestone. You can put in the estimated cost that milestone is going to cost you. We do want to see the estimated cost correlating to your budget, which we're going to get to next. But we do a little bit of detail here in the milestones, and like I said, a minimum of 2. Obviously, the more complex your project is, we're going to want to see more, but a minimum of 2. Burke, you want to add anything else into that?
So the milestones, the reason we say a minimum of 2 milestones is we have to report up through FEMA and DHS, and that is the minimum that they have for projects. When you're looking at this, try and lay it out with what milestone, what points do you need to hit in order to stay on track, for your project? What are things that need to be accomplished in order for you to complete this project, is what we're really looking for in there. It is your, it'll lay out kind of as your work plan for this grant if you're awarded it. So.
Any questions on milestones? Okay, hearing none. Once you've entered your information here, just like before, you'd go up to the top, click Save. This is a review of everything you just entered. So if you're happy with it, you click Mark as Complete. Again, you can edit it if you need to. Once we hit Mark as Complete, now we got our little check mark. We're getting close to being done. Next form here is the budget. And this is, I guess I'd say, the other part of the meat and potatoes. This is where you actually enter your finance information. And this form is a little bit wonky, so we'll explain something on here as we go through it before we really get into it. You'll notice that there's a lot of different budget categories on here. We're going to skip management, administration, and indirect costs until the end of this form here, but all of these forms here, even if they don't apply to you, you still need to get in them and then save it, and we'll show you how to do that here in a second. We'll just use the top one as an example. So even if you don't have any funds that you're going to need to go towards planning, you need to enter into that category by clicking Add, and then just simply clicking Save. And you notice here it gives you a blue dollar amount of 0, so you're going to need to have a blue dollar amount on each category here. And that's just one of the funky little things about this system. It won't let you save it until you have a blue dollar amount in every category. But we'll talk about these categories here for a second. So planning funds, it's not really something we see a lot with this grant, but it is something that you can use if you need to update your emergency operations plan, for instance. Talks about continuity of operations plans. Maybe you have a hazmat annex or some other kind of functional annex of your EOP that you need to update. So you can use this grant to bring in a contractor or just to work within your own system to update the plan. Again, it's not something we see very often, so we don't really anticipate seeing a lot of that. Organization, contractual, this is if you're bringing in a contractor to do something. Maybe you're bringing in a contractor to help you with a plan. Maybe you're bringing in a contractor to help with an exercise. This is where you're going to put in contractual costs. Organization personnel. Very few personnel types are allowed on this grant just because of the grant guidance. But sometimes you'll have we see like the MATIC, the Fusion Center here in the state. There is some personnel there that are allowed here. So most people won't need to put personnel on here. If you have any questions about whether or not it's allowed, go ahead and throw that in. But most people won't need to put personnel here. Travel, if you're doing any kind of travel, if you need to go out of state or something for a conference or a training event, that's where this would go here. You'll notice that we just want the purpose of it, how much you estimate lodging will cost, your per diem, mileage, and then this will be your total amount over here. I notice on here that international travel is not allowed unless it's approved in advance. That's something that we'll be keeping an eye on the applications for. If we see any international travel on the application, we'll actually be getting a hold of you and asking you for some more documentation so we can give that to FEMA. So here's where we talk about equipment. And when you remember when I mentioned that authorized equipment list, we talked about how we define equipment. And essentially, the way that the 2 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, defines equipment is if it's over $5,000. The actual definition is a little bit longer than that, but for the purpose of this, we can basically say if you have a single item that costs over $5,000, it's generally considered equipment. And remember, you got to read that authorized equipment list, and we'll check this link too to make sure that's a functional link. But once it's up, you'll need to check that list to make sure it's something that's on there. Something that we see a lot of times is if somebody's buying a bulk of a product, usually radios is what we see, and maybe the quantity costs more than $5,000, but each individual item is less than that, it doesn't count as equipment. So if you bought 6 radios and they cost $1,000 a piece, so there you're at $6,000, it's not equipment because each radio costs $1,000. So it's just a single item. So generally anything small like radios, things like that, you're not going to see on here. It's the big things, your radio towers, your generators, your vehicles, those are going to be listed on here. But you notice we just want the description, we want the authorized equipment list number, how much it's going to cost. And then accountable supplies. The 2 CFR does break down the difference between accountable supplies and supplies. But for accountable supplies, it's generally anything that's less than $5,000 but has a shelf life greater than 1 year. If it's something that's going to have a shelf life less than 1 year, your pens, your pencils, your paper, things like that, you can throw that down here in other costs. The difference between equipment, accountable supplies, and supplies, that's something that can get kind of confusing if you're not used to dealing with that. So again, if you have questions, feel free to give us a call, and we can kind of walk you through that. Training down here, it's kind of self-explanatory. If you're doing any training with the grant, you throw it in there. Exercise, again, self-explanatory. Construction renovation. A lot of times we'll see projects where they list the entire, keeping on our generator example, don't list your entire project budget up here in equipment. You would list the generator cost right here, construction costs right here. Any other costs that are associated with that can go down here. So what I'm going to do, just to walk through this form, we have to go into each one and click Save. Sorry, it's a little bit tedious. Bear with me for just a second. I'll just go ahead and throw some budget information in one of these categories just so we have something. So put something in here real quick. Throw something in there. So you'll notice that it didn't populate up there, Bert. We'll check that here in a second. But you will see a running budget total up here. But we'll just keep going and enter into each one.
Hey, Eric.
Yes.
This is Sherry. Can I make a
Sherry.
suggestion on the budget? Don't list each individual item, but if you're buying like if you're buying like a radio, list the radio and then list out don't list out the supplies, but add your supplies up and put it in order to install that radio.
So what Sherry's getting at, and since she volunteered, I'm assuming she doesn't mind us talking about her grant a little bit.
I don't.
She inherited a grant that was actually written by somebody else, so it's not her fault, but they put every little widget, every screw, every nut, every bolt, every wire, every connector that would need to be in there for their Sheriff's Office communications grant. They listed every single one of those, and the challenge came up when every single one of those cost something different than what what the grant writer had estimated. So we had to do several budget revisions. So what she's saying is any of those little itty-bitty widgets, any of the just general supplies, you can sometimes lump those into a category. You can just lump them in, say, office supplies or miscellaneous, things like that. If we have questions, we'll give you a call, or if you have questions, you can give us a call. Sometimes we do need a little more detail. In Sherry's case, she had something like 150 little individual items, and that got incredibly complex. So that's something that like I said, if we have questions, we need clarification, we'll give you a shout.
So one of the things to make sure, don't make it so general that it just says miscellaneous supplies, but but you also don't need to be detailed down to each size, screw, bolt, everything else. Try and lump you can lump some of those together with a description of connectors and wiring for this project, and then estimating what that cost for those will be. So.
Okay, so what we've done now is we've entered into every category. We've entered a $50,000 budget. We have not yet entered into the management, administration, or indirect costs because we need to throw a little more explanation about that in there. So, management administration, this is something that we don't see very often, but I think more people could probably stand to take advantage of. This is essentially costs related to the management of the grant itself. I'm not talking about the project, I mean the actual grant. So sometimes we'll hear comments from some of our points of contact that it takes their fiscal officer, their treasurer, just too many hours to compile all the receipts and everything, and they wish there was a way that they could get reimbursed. Well, this is that way right here, management administration. So you can claim up to 5% of your total project costs for management administration. You cannot, however, claim indirect costs if you're doing management administration. Now, what indirect costs are, these are things that are costs related to the management of the grant and or the project, but they're hard to quantify. And a lot of times we'll see like utilities, for instance, office supplies. If you have an office printer that you're going to be using, but there's no real way to quantify how much toner and how much paper you're going to be using out of that printer, this is where indirect costs comes in. Indirect costs gets a little more complicated, so we don't see this very often. What we'll need if you are claiming indirect costs is either an indirect cost rate agreement or a cost rate proposal and cost allocation plan. And again, that's not something that most people are familiar with, so we don't expect to see a lot of these, but if you have a question, if you think you want to claim indirect costs, you can give us a call as you're working through your application. For the purpose of this example, I'm going to enter into management administration. I'm going to throw in 5%. And remember, we had put in $50,000 earlier. So, it's not populating that 50,000. We might have a glitch that we need to work on, but we'll figure that out. Indirect costs, even though I can't claim that because I claimed M&A, I do need to go ahead and enter into there and then click Save, just like any of those other budget categories. And we'll have to figure this out because it should be calculating the total up at the top. It should actually say 5250 or 52.5. Yeah, Casey actually just brought up a good point. M&A can't be used to supplant someone's salary, and in fact, any of these budget categories can't be used for supplanting. And so, just real briefly, what supplanting is essentially if you have a project already budgeted, and then you get awarded a grant, and you go and you turn around and you say, well, let's redo our budget to take away that $50,000 and shift it to somewhere else. That's supplanting, because you've already budgeted for the project. It's already something you were planning to do. If you don't have money for your project, if you don't have the $50,000 to build a shelter generator, that's when you can apply for a grant. And the same thing here for the M&A. You can't use this to hire people. You can't use this to boost someone's salary. If you are claiming M&A, what we're going to need to see is their salary somehow broken out. So we're going to need to see, maybe you're telling us that this person will spend 6 hours a month working on the grant. We need to see that actually broken out somehow on their timesheet or in some sort of documentation. Somewhere it's saying 6 hours is being charged toward this grant.
Additionally, the way this grant is written is if you are the entity that is overseeing this, and I'm going to use an emergency manager as an example, and it is part of your other duties as assigned and part of your job description to manage grants, M&A cannot be used to supplant that. So that is one thing that we have, that we discuss quite frequently with people, just to make sure that they understand that M&A, as Eric brought up, the example that he gave was excellent. If it's outside of their regular realm of duties, like a financial officer, that is where M&A can be used. However, it cannot be used to supplant or increase or somehow change the payment system and payment patterns of someone who is already expected to be doing that job.
So we're almost done with this budget form, but while Casey was talking, I was actually looking at this and realized I did forget to mention, if you are using funds for an exercise, Your exercise does need to be HSEEP compliant. That's the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program. I don't think we'd have any problems with that. Most people do HSEEP exercises. But if that's the concern of yours, if you're not familiar with HSEEP, you can check out this website here. And we also have an exercise guy here in our office, Ed Graberis. You can give him a call. We are going to have to look at this little glitch. It's not populating the budget total right, which is a little aggravating because it was working the other day, but we will definitely work on that. But what you would have seen if it was working right is it would add this 2,500 to the 50,000 we already entered, and it would show 52,005. We'll just pretend it's working right for now. We'll go ahead and hit mark as complete. Oh, I thought I did that. No, I did that. Oh, sorry. I'm jumping ahead of myself. This section down here at the bottom, indirect cost rate documentation. Like we mentioned, if you're claiming indirect costs, you have to have the indirect cost rate agreement or the cost rate proposal and cost allocation plan. This is just like any other budget category. You have to enter into it even if you don't have anything to add in there. And to enter into it, you got to go up to the top, hit edit. And now if you scroll back down, you'll notice there's some choose file boxes. So this works just like any other choose file. We'll just throw something in there. If you don't have a file to enter, that's fine. You still have to go up there, click edit, and then you can ignore this and then go back up to the top again and hit save. Okay, so now we can hit mark as complete, and we have our little check mark. So one more field to enter, additional documentation field. This is kind of a catch-all field. This is if you have any documentation at all you want us to look at, anything you think that we need to review while looking at your grant that there wasn't another place to look at. A perfect example is going to be if you've already received any kind of project outline, if you've already received any kind of proposal for your project, anything that's written down that you want us to look at, go ahead and throw that in here. This works just like the other fields where you added a file. You click add. You find your file. Where is it? Throw a little description in here and then hit save. And again, you can do this multiple times too if you have multiple files. Once you've added anything, or even if you don't have anything to add, still go in there and hit mark as complete. So at this point, all of our forms are done. At this point, you can still go in and edit any of these forms. You can look at any of these forms. We'll just click on this one as an example. You can go in there and see what you entered. Hit back when you're comfortable with it. But up until the time you hit submit, you can go through here and review and edit anything you want to. Once you hit submit, though, you're done. You can't edit it. So before we do that, is there any other questions at all on anything? Remember, hit star 6 to come off of mute. Yeah, Casey reminded me that if you did hit submit and you did realize that you needed to add something or you made an error, we can go through there and we can essentially unlock it for you to allow you to edit it again. But that's something you'd have to contact us for. It's not something you can just jump in there and edit. Okay, not hearing any other questions. Going to go ahead and hit that submit button. You'll get a little "Are you sure?" box. Hit OK, and bam, you're done. So a little bit on the timeline of this. We mentioned earlier that the applications are due by 11:59 p.m. on March 3rd. So that's 1 minute before midnight on March 3rd. What's going to happen is in April, the Senior Advisory Committee will meet to go over the applications. Generally, that's a 2-day process where we look at everybody's application, we go through the available funding, and we essentially just start awarding applications till we run out of money. Then what's going to happen is everybody will be notified, probably by email, possibly in writing, about whether or not they were awarded or not. If you were awarded, you cannot spend any money until you actually have an award packet in hand from us, and us meaning DES, and that's going to happen sometime around the 1st of October, because that's when the grant actually starts. That's when the period of performance starts, is the 1st of October. The period of performance is generally 1 year. In rare cases, we can sometimes do extensions if you have some sort of project delay, but that is rare. So if you're doing a project, it does need to be something that you can anticipate completing within 1 year. So that's kind of the process. That's really everything we needed to say, but we'll definitely stick around for a couple more minutes if there's any questions or anything. Remember, hit *6 to come off of mute.
And this is Burke. I have just a couple final comments on this. As we were going through this, the application is set up very, or I should say the evaluation matrix that is in the guidance document matches up with most of the questions and the way we have the application set up. So please, if nothing else, look at that application or the guidance document, attachment E, which is the evaluation matrix that they'll be looking at. At this time, we don't know how much funding DHS is going to allot to the state of Montana for this. So, and we do not have the federal guidance out at this time either. If there are changes when that is released, we will reach out to all of the applicants for any additional information that we may need. We received an email the other day that said that the application period from the time that the notice of funding opportunity is released until the application is due is going to be very short this year. So that's why we're open. We have this open now, and we're looking at March to close it, so that we give as much time as we possibly can to the applicants to finish this. Eric kind of mentioned a little bit about the process. So after March 3rd, we will do a review to make sure that all the applicants have submitted. We'll reach out to anyone if they have submitted or have not submitted but started one in there to see why, if there was a computer glitch or anything else. But don't expect us to open it back up to be able to submit this. We'll do a review. We'll reach out to anyone if there's something that needs clarification or is missing in there. And then the Senior Advisory Committee will go through and evaluate the projects and listing them in funding priority. So they'll go through that, and then as we know what the funding is, then they will be awarded at that time. So again, like I said, I think the guidance document will help a lot. Please take a look at that, especially those couple attachments at the back with the evaluation matrix when you're doing these applications. A couple things from the call today. We will look at the AEL link, the authorized equipment list link, and we will get back on the budget to make sure that it's populating as it was last week. So if you guys at any time, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Burke, this is Sherry. So if somebody, and I'm not this organized yet, but if I were to go in today and start trying to put my budget in, would I have to do it later, or do you want us to just kind of hold off until you tell us that those glitches are fixed?
No, go ahead and do it. I'm going to get on there right after this call and start and make sure that budget is working. If for some reason anyone has at any time there's a glitch in there, as sometimes we find, please reach out to us at any time. Even if you have questions on, we can't give you, we can help you with the system, with everything else. We can't help you necessarily write the application, but we can give you guidance on what the Senior Advisory Committee is looking for in different areas. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. The other avenue is our district field officers. They can also be used as a resource if you guys have any questions on this as well. So, and I believe that both Eric and Casey's contact information is in the guidance document on our website as well.
I have a quick
Any other questions?
Yeah, if you don't mind. It's Eric Gilbertson from Lewis and Clark County. So going to your SAC priority list, attachment B, I see a couple areas that we typically apply for, the systems communicator and also EOD support. And then I noticed somewhere in there that it said there was only one application per jurisdiction. Are those identified priorities outside of that?
Yes. So the Senior Advisory Committee, the 6 projects that they have identified, are not one of the is not considered the project for your local entity.
Okay.
So if on there, so we'll take the EOD as an example. They have identified EOD as a priority, so the 3 teams in the state have to come together because that's the funding that's available for it. So
right.
To work together for that, but that does not preclude Lewis and Clark County, who hosts one of those EOD teams, from putting in one other application.
Gotcha. Perfect. And then my other question, I guess, in regards to that, even if you are an identified priority, you still need the community support letter from the LEPC in support of
Correct.
that application. Okay.
The full application is still due for that.
Okay. Perfect.
Yep. Because they're saying that we're going to look at funding those, but if you don't apply for them, then those funds we can't award those funds. So.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the guidance document this year. It's a lot clearer to me this year. So thanks again.
In terms of contact information, Casey and myself, Eric, our contact info is on page 14 of that guidance document. So you can get a hold of either of us and we'll help you with your questions. I think most people that I see on the call probably already know how to reach us though, but if you're not familiar, just look on page 14. So we don't hear any other questions, so we'll probably go ahead and sign off now. And like we mentioned, that step-by-step guide will be available hopefully by the end of today, so keep an eye on the website for that, and it'll be on there. And we hope to hear from you folks as you're progressing through your application. We really encourage you to get a hold of us as you have questions. The sooner the better. So thank you all for joining us today.
All right. Thanks, everyone.